Hey guys, I know this looks a little bit different, but bluntly, my office looks like a hot mess right now. I'm getting a different room built out as an office at the moment. I actually tried to record some things outside, but I kept getting distracted by all the little furry creatures everywhere.
What's up, Thumper?
So you get me on my dining room table. The Mountain Dew is here because I'm white trash. So today what I wanted to talk about is how God communicates with us. You know, it's kind of funny because sometimes I think we make the mistake of getting God and just kind of using him as a trinket on the shelf. We don't realize that God actually communicates with us all the time. Sometimes he communicates with us through kind of big obvious ways, you know, some kind of big life event or a sign. There are people I know, and I honestly believe them, who say that they've actually audibly heard things before that they feel like was either God or a messenger or something supernatural that was communicating to them something that God had for them in their life. Now, we all wish that God would be that clear, but sometimes he's not, and there's kind of good reason for it. I mean, when you look throughout the scriptures, as many times as we see God communicating through angels and supernatural signs, we also see God communicating through more subtle ways, and that's how God oftentimes actually communicates to us in our own lives. There's actually different phases of history that the Bible encompasses, and during some of those periods of time, theologians will call those periods of great silence, where God isn't raising up different prophets or supernatural. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what was God doing then? Was he just simply not communicating to people? Well, we know that's not really the case, because God did communicate to people during those times. It just oftentimes happened in more subtle and personal ways. In your own life, I think if you were to ask yourself where you feel like God has communicated to you, you would find that it's in those more subtle ways. I have oftentimes referred to it as kind of these series of very unlikely coincidences that occur. And, when one thing happens, you may think, well, that might just have been coincidence, but then something else happens and something else. And eventually you have to step back and say, this is clearly God communicating to me in my life. I know that I've had that as we've been going through planting this church and doing different events where something will happen, I'll get discouraged, or I'll feel like, maybe that maybe like I've fallen off of the horse and that God isn't communicating to me and I'm just not listening to him. But then something will happen, not something big, but something small. An individual will reach out and kind of give me a little testimony of something happening in their lives, or somebody will step up to take on something that the church kind of committed to doing. When those little things happen, it would be easy to dismiss any one of them as just a happy little coincidence. But when you start stacking them all together, you start seeing that clearly God is working in my life. I feel like this is something that is lost on many individuals who want to see kind of a show me God, a God that is going to be present in their lives every single day, very obviously right in front of their face. And because it may take a little bit of discernment, they simply don't look for God, and as a result, they make the mistake of accusing God of not being active in their life. Maybe you've been in that boat. Here in a moment, you're going to read some scripture that kind of goes over a couple of the different ways that God communicates with us. And I think what you're going to end up seeing through both of these are parallels for your own life. You may even think about times when God has communicated to you through some kind of big, massive, major event, but then how God also communicated to you through something that was much more subtle, something that you might have missed if you weren't looking for it. As many things as we like to criticize the Pharisees about, one of the things that I think is an often overlooked flaw of the Pharisees is how they expected Christ to come here to earth. One of the reasons why they didn't believe Jesus wasn't necessarily because of the things he said. It was because of the way he did it. It's because of the way that he chose to communicate to the world through undesirables, through individuals that came from unassuming backgrounds. I mean, even bodily, corporally, how Christ came to this earth was through a region that many people look down on. I mean, Galilee was a backwater. It would be like saying the next Albert Einstein is going to come from Beckley, West Virginia. If anybody's from Beckley, don't take offense to that. I'm just saying, I think you would agree with me, the next Albert Einstein is not going to come from Beckley, West Virginia. because Christ didn't come in a way that they anticipated, they completely shut out what it was he was saying. Because the messaging wasn't right for their own ears, they denied themselves the blessing of what Christ was actually doing. There is actually one individual, Nicodemus, that was a Pharisee but opened himself up to what Christ was doing and what he was saying, and as a result, he had the opportunity to learn more about what Christ was doing, and in fact was blessed by the testimony of Christ. We are clearly a very communicated society. I mean, we all have these magical devices in our pocket that let us communicate with people. We have email, we have instant messaging, we have so many different ways to be able to communicate with one another, either individually or en masse as a big group. And so because of that, we've become accustomed to only really concerning ourselves with that which confronts us every single day. Just think about how many people have become obsessed with either something in pop culture, a Johnny Depp, Amber Heard type trial, or something in politics, or whatever it is that might be shoved in front of their face because they're actively getting the communication all the time. Because God often communicates to us in a more subtle way, sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that God is simply not talking at all, but nothing could be further from the truth. If we're actually willing to stop for a moment and open our eyes and look for how God is working in our lives, I think we'd be shocked to see how many ways God is blessing us. But I can guarantee you this, that God doesn't want to be a God that just sits on the shelf. He doesn't want to be a God that just sits back and looks from afar at your life, and he doesn't want to be a passive participant in whatever it is that you're toiling away on this earth doing. God has a plan for you. He has a plan for what you're doing, and he has a plan for good, a plan for something that is more glorious than what you could possibly imagine. But in order to be in tune with what that thing is that God is calling us to do, we have to be willing to actually stop, get over ourselves, get over our own expectations of what we think God is going to be, and actually look at how God is presenting himself. I think if we're all more willing to do that, all of us will be blessed, not just because of what God does in our lives, but by what God does through us in the lives of other individuals. That's our lesson that we have for you today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless. I'm going to finish my Mountain Dew.